Explain some of the Americans that you were personally involved with for quite a few years, some of the most notable ones.
Well, Joe Scheidler, Jack Wilkie, Bernie Nathanson, Nellie Gray, Judy Brown, Frank Pavone. And I guess in the beginning, the persons that I met with on a regular basis were Connie Marshner and Bill Wyrick. I think his name was Paul Wyrick. Paul Wyrick.
They were strategists.
They were strategists. I learned a lot from them. But it was really interesting that a young black pastor from, I believe it was a Baptist congregation, said, "Why are we not discussing NSSM 200? And the people all said, "What the heck's that?" Well, National Security Study Memorandum, written by Henry Kissinger, I believe in 1991, for Richard Nixon. And it was how the United States would continue to hold on to their world dominance, providing they had access to raw materials that they would need. And they named 7 countries, I believe it was, and they wanted them because of maybe it's their potash or their rubber, whatever. I don't remember exactly what it was. But, and here's how we're going to go about doing it. We're going to try to entice them with great funding that we can provide. And if that doesn't work, we'll destabilize their governments. And if that doesn't work, then we'll bomb the hell out of them. Now, you know, something like that.
Population control was a big factor.
Right. Yeah. And so in the end, I approached him after this meeting that we had of leaders in the United States, and I said, "I know all about this." It was delivered to us by a man called Malachi Martin. He was a former Jesuit priest. And I sent our Quebec lieutenant, Gilles Grandin, who was a former member of the Canadian Diplomatic Corps, and he was for a time the acting ambassador in Haiti. And he took our Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, before he became Prime Minister, in a jeep throughout various parts of Europe and whatnot. And anyway, he met with Malachi Martin. Malachi had reached us and wanted to meet with me, and I said, "Jill, would you do this because it's up your alley?" So he flew to New York and met with Malachi Martin, who told him about this NSSM 200. So he came back and told me all about it, and it was around that time that Pope John Paul the Great contacted us through the CCCB offices, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops offices in Ottawa, because he was concerned about what was happening at the United Nations, because non-governmental organizations were pushing to have abortion made an international human right and to recognize more than 2 genders. So Jill and a man called Lou DeRocco, who subsequently became a Catholic priest and is still a Catholic priest, the 2 of them were sent to Cairo for a UN conference. And then they went to Beijing, Istanbul, Rome, Copenhagen, all over the place, and they came back with all that was going on, and we alerted then the clergy in Canada to what was happening. And that had a very lukewarm effect. I think 3 members of the hierarchy in total expressed some interest or concern. One sent us a $1,000 donation, one sent us $200, and I think the other one sent us some money out of his own pocket. But we couldn't make it clear to them the danger of all this. In fact, our own supporters and other leaders in Canada decided that they would go to New York, to the United Nations, and find out for themselves. So this Team Canada went to the United Nations to see exactly what was going on, and they came back with the same horror stories. They said, "Oh, this is terrible. Something has to be done about this. Well, we tried to do something about it. We established a rapport with the UN. At the UN, we became a non-governmental organization. We did all sorts of things, and to this day, we still go to these meetings, and we've established as allies representatives from many countries, probably 30 different countries on our side.
And not all of the countries are Christian countries that are on our side.
Muslim countries have stood up, and then they are on our side too. And it's not just our side; it's the side of the good people who are very concerned about what's happening. I can remember when we got the reports back from the United Nations the first time. There were 4 different faith communities represented, and then us, who we're not associated, when we were largely Catholic in the beginning, and now we're a sizable portion of our leadership and our supporters, our donors, they're from other faith communities. And so it was very interesting to see all that dynamic take place. And as a result of that, there's a very strong bond that's been established with all of those different countries. At one point, we had, as a strategy, we had this Gilles Grandin from the province of Quebec go and visit with the embassies in Ottawa. And we picked out certain ones where NGOs from those countries were bad guys. They were promoting all of this anti-life and anti-family stuff. And we wondered, well, I wonder if their government back home knows about this. And so he went in and lobbied the ambassadors, and believe me, they were not aware that this was happening. And so it...
What resulted from that?
What resulted from that was that they toughened up. They changed the people that were going to the United Nations meetings with other people that they trusted. But at least we rang the bell and said, hey, alert, alert, this is what's happening.
What was the role of the Vatican in the United Nations?
The the Holy See delegation was very strong. And in the end, one of our key people, Samantha Singson, actually appeared as one of the delegates for the Holy See delegation. And we worked very closely with them. In fact, we did up until pre-pandemic, when we jointly sponsored a couple of workshops at big UN conferences in New York. And they've been very good all the way along. I was expecting something might happen that would deter us, but it's still there. That strength is still there, watching out for all of these things happening.
Which nations were most receptive to our information?
Oh, my heavens. I can't remember now. It's, well, in the early days, Ireland was strong. Malta was strong. I think Hungary was strong. Perhaps Honduras, where one of the board members of the International Right to Life Federation was a former ambassador to the UK. But that's really interesting too, because I've been in countries where we had armed guards walking around the complex where the international conferences were being held. I can remember being in one country where there was a fence that came down, and your car moved into that area, and a fence came down behind. There were 2 soldiers with weapons, guard dogs, and another soldier with a long stick with a mirror on the bottom, who went around the vehicle to make sure there were no bombs underneath. I was at conferences one conference in a country where I wanted to go to a mall across the street. And they said, where are you going, sir? And I said, oh, I'm just going to go to the mall. They said, no, you're not. We'll put you in a car, and you'll go over to the mall in a car. And because if they see this white-haired man crossing the street, you'll be kidnapped. And I said, okay. And I was in another country where the truck pulled up, the trucks pulled up, and the canvas rolled up at the back, and soldiers jumped out, and I thought, uh-oh, we're in trouble. But then we were having lunch with the the leader of the Senate, and she had told us that these guards were there to protect us. And I thought, whoa, that's quite different. And then what other things happened? Like all sorts of different things like that occurred. And
so, Campaign Life Coalition was very heavily involved at the international level as well as at the...
we still are. Yeah. And Matthew Wojciechowski, a Polish kid who's got a family now, 4 children and whatnot. Kid, you see, everybody that's younger than me, I think they're kids. He's doing a wonderful job there. And then the young women that are going there to the United Nations too, they're doing a fantastic job too. And
what's the reception they get when they go there?
The pro-life people love them.
Now, pro-life delegates, you mean, or from different nations?
Pro-life delegates from different nations love them.
Yeah.
And I can remember at one point even, the representatives from one organization, we were trying to get our NGO status, and countries were objecting to us getting them and whatnot. And believe it or not, it was the government of Pakistan who spoke for us. And they spoke highly for a couple of young people that they were very impressed with. I think one was it Paul Jelsovac? I can't remember now, one of them anyway. And eventually we got it, and then it's been a slice. When Jill Grandin and Father and Lou DeRocco were going there lobbying, I had to make sure that they could speak more than one language, and the two of them could speak English, French, and Father DeRocco could speak Italian, and Jill could speak Spanish, and so as a result of that, so many of the people and we produced material. When I say we, again, I'm talking about the coalition from various countries and various organizations.
Pro-life groups.
Pro-life groups, and it was just a fantastic opportunity to get the word out. And those people appreciated what came out, except one man came over to Louis DeRocco one point and said, "Pregnancy is the worst thing that could happen to women," and on he went like a maniac. And so Lou DeRocco took that to heart. And now as a Catholic priest, he occasionally preaches about that, about his experience there. Yeah. Wonderful people involved. My heavens. I can't say enough about them all. They were all the ones that I traveled with to these various countries, to the UK, in the UK, we were traveling by 2 buses to a location for their conference several hours outside of London. And they said, "Okay, Canuck, sing a song from home." And I said, "Oh, what?" They said, "Sing a song." So all I could think of, and it wasn't a Canadian song, was Davy Crockett. So I sang, "Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee." Well, they all laughed like crazy. They thought that was the funniest thing, of this Canuck singing this. I said I could do Frere Jacques too, but I don't know whether. And so,
Quebec song, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, one of our workers in our head office, Victor Penny, his daughter was at a Christmas party, and I happened to be there representing St. Nick, and so she sang a song. Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee. So I joined her in singing it. Well, she was so shocked that this St. Nick imitator knew the Davy Crockett song. All kinds of wonderful things like that. You know, it's.
Go through a list of some of the names and personalities that you especially remember through the years. In Campaign Life Coalition and outside of Campaign Life that you worked with?
Well, Joe Borowski was probably number one. Yeah. He was the first pro-life hero in Canada. Linda Gibbons, who spent all kinds of time in jail, almost as much as Joan Andrews in the United States has spent in jail. And she and Chris Bell, her husband, doing a fantastic job there still. Linda Gibbons still doing a fantastic job. Mary Wagner in British Columbia also spending time in jail. Father Ted Colleton of the Holy Ghost Fathers, the Spiritans, spent time in jail, wrote 3 books, was just an inspiration to everybody. Father Alphonse de Valk, who wrote a book about how abortion came to be in Canada, and a Basilian father, and he just did wonderful work. He established Catholic Insight magazine, and I got him. I hired him as editor of the interim newspaper at one point. He wrote columns for the interim. We had conferences all over the place, and he was frequently there to do that. Who else would I say? Probably I'm falling over people, and I can't. Gwen Landolt, who I mentioned earlier, was a driving force in all of this stuff. Jill Grandin, Archbishop Prendergast in Ottawa, when we started the National March for Life in Canada, he said, I said, how many bishops do you think he can get out? And he said, oh, I don't know how many normally come. And I said 2 or 3. So he got so excited about it. At one point we had over 20 bishops that were coming to the...
And a few cardinals.
And a few cardinals coming to the National March for Life, and the papal nuncio, and all sorts of people like that. And he was greatly influential in getting those people to come out and provide that spiritual leadership. Other prominent ones, I'm going to be embarrassed now that I'm going to forget people, but Miss Winifred Prestwich, the former vice president of, vice principal of the Havergal Girls' School.
She had an influence on UNICEF.
She had a great influence because she showed that UNICEF was involved in abortion funding, etc. And the funny part was a columnist in Toronto, and a newspaper columnist, wrote an article, and he mentioned this stuff. And so he was taken to the woodshed, and he had to appear before a committee. And he said, "Hey, we got it. She's there, and she and the information is totally positive." I said, "You lost." I looked at the people, and I could tell from their mannerisms and everything and what they had to say that you've lost. Sure enough, he lost, and a couple of weeks later they came down with the ruling. I invited him to come to lunch with me after this hearing, and he said, "No, you're too negative." I said, "Okay." So I went off, and
well, that was before the decision was made. Is that
that's
right?
correct.
So
yeah.
he didn't believe you.
No, he didn't believe that.
And then it turned out you were right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But I can remember another young couple that I was talking with who were on side, and Joe Borowski, this pro-life hero from Winnipeg, Manitoba, had said something about the hierarchy, and this young couple said, "We're not going to support you any longer because of what Joe Borowski said." So I tried to explain to them what it was all about, and they eventually came around to see what was going on.
Yeah.
I think that one of the papal nuncios was very good. I try to remember. The papal nuncio is the archbishop that's assigned to a country.
It's like an ambassador. By
the Vatican as an ambassador.
Yeah.
In Canada, the papal nuncio was always the head of the diplomatic corps. So every country's new representatives, new ambassadors would come and present their credentials to the papal nuncio. So the former Canadian ambassador to the Vatican, Ambassador Bone, and Jill Grandin, who had been working with the other countries as a Canadian ambassador as well, invited me to come and chat about what was going on in Canada. So the three of us talked about it, and then the former ambassador said, "We have to meet with the nuncio." So the nuncio invited us for lunch, so we went to lunch there, and he said, "I want you to meet," after we finished everything, and he asked all sorts of questions. He said, "I want you to meet with the Pope." And I said, "Oh, okay, John Paul the Great." And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, that'd be wonderful. We'll set it up." Okay, I said, "Shall I call?" "Well, give us a couple of days." So I went home and told my wife, "I'm going to meet John Paul." And she said, "Oh, isn't that interesting? You are, yeah. And why would he listen to you when he is hearing from all his fellow bishops and they're telling a different story than you're telling?"
Yeah.
I said, "I don't know." So I went to sleep, got up in the morning, and I said I'm going to go call Bishop Vaughn, the auxiliary bishop in New York, for John Cardinal O'Connor. So I called him and I said, here's the drill. And he laughed and he said, what do you want me to do? I said, I want you to ask Cardinal O'Connor if he will take information to the Holy Father for us.
What information?
Information on what was going on in the hierarchy across Canada and also in the individual dioceses which we knew about, or which we had collected from all of our people across the country.
So this had nothing to do with the papal nuncio then? Or he wouldn't take the information?
No, the papal nuncio wanted me to go and take the information
I see.
to the Pope.
Oh, okay. And you thought it would be better to go through...
And my wife thought it would be better if you had somebody else, somebody on the same level as the bishops from Canada. Okay. So I called, and then Cardinal O'Connor talked to me and said, okay, what have you got? So I told him, he said, okay, I'm sending Austin Vaughn to Toronto to meet with you. So he got on a plane and flew up. And I went through all sorts of stuff. He wanted to go to London, Ontario. It was a snowstorm. We drove to London, Ontario in the snowstorm. And he was writing in a coil notebook everything that was going on. And then I met with him in Montreal at a big conference organized by Human Life International, where all the yahoos attacked us, throwing batteries and coins, and all of a sudden the police were there with barricades and on horseback and the whole bit.
It was a violent demonstration.
It was a violent demonstration there, and the speaker that they had invited from Africa was Father Paul Marks, and Bishop Vaughn said, here, you're in charge of him at the end of church service. He said, will you take this man and protect him? I said, oh. And he said to me, I can't believe this is happening in Canada. I said, we can't believe it either, but it's all right. But that was a very interesting thing where a police car was burned. They were slashing tires and doing all kinds of stuff like that against us. I met a young girl there from a New England state. I'm trying to remember exactly where. She was about 16. And I said to her after the service and after we had to get past all these yahoos screaming at us and throwing things at us, what was that like for you? And she said it was like I had died, and before I could get to the pearly gates, I had to first walk past the gates of hell. Yeah. I said, whoa, okay. Yeah, it's pretty good. You summed it up better than I could. Yeah. But
many people said the same thing.
It was interesting that at a particular time during the service, after what the Catholics call Holy Communion, there was a silence in the church, as all you could hear was the screaming outside. It was so loud. And then all of a sudden, it was like a peace came over the entire congregation, and people looked up and looked at one another because they all were feeling it at the same time. And others said when they went out, despite the fact that it was cloudy that day, that the clouds opened up and they could see what appeared to be a cross in the middle of all that. So that was very interesting. And then as a result of what John Cardinal O'Connor had taken to John Paul the Great, he acted on what we had sent.
A bishop was removed.
Two of them.
Two of them, yeah.
Yeah. We also were given a fax number into the papal residence in the Vatican as well, which we had, and would send stuff. Before that time, it was an Alitalia pilot that took things over for us and took it to the Canadian College over there.
So the cooperation with the Vatican was very, very good at that time.
Cool.
Thanks to Cardinal O'Connor and the nuncio.
Well, when people would ask me, as a Catholic, how do you know what to do here in the pro-life movement? And I say, well, I look over to Rome, and there was a man elected the same month that I took over Campaign Life Coalition, and I look to see what he's doing, and I go from, he had such an influence. Protestant and other Christian pastors would come to me at the time of his death and say, who do you have lined up now to take his place? Yeah. Who is the strong one that'll come
Carry on.
carry on. It was quite fascinating. It was quite fascinating. One, if I could think of some other people, persons, Reverend Ken Campbell was very strong. Reverend Ron Marr, he was with the Christian Inquirer, and he taught me how to send out letters of appeal to people. Now, Ron Marr, at the time of Canada's the repatriation of the Canadian Constitution and the establishment of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, well, there was a committee set up in Toronto, and it was made up of Ron Marr as the chair, and there were 15 other clergymen there. And
various denominations.
Various denominations. So there's a committee of 17 of us, all but 2 were pastors from various evangelical or non-evangelical Christian churches, and Gwen Landolt and I. And we were packed into Massey Hall, which was a huge entertainment theater in downtown Toronto. Holds about 3,300 people. And the people outside were protesting us being there because we were demanding that God be recognized in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and all sorts of stuff. But the fact was that all these clergymen were very strong on all of this stuff. And there were no Catholic priests involved. There were just various other clergy.
Why were there no Catholic priests involved?
I think they were afraid of stepping up, and that's what they are, fearful most of the time, because of the actions that will be taken against them if they don't.
By the Chancery? Or?
By the Chancery office if they don't toe the line. And because it's going to affect the donations, which is always at the top of the list.
Yeah.
But of course they're involved in bad publicity with scandals of various types and whatnot.
Yeah,
but
that was a big factor too.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, when I mentioned the one archbishop that was so strong in helping us and spoke at the Brazil conference by Zoom, when he was appointed as the archbishop, the priests of the diocese who weren't on side took up a petition to get rid of him. It was very interesting.
That was in Quebec.
That was in Quebec, yes. Anyway, so the reality is that everything's very interesting. When David Packer, the police officer, refused to guard the Morgentaler abortuary because it was illegal, they sent him to Coventry. I mean, they suspended him. They put him on a desk job. Eventually, he was gone from the police department. But he stood up, and you wondered why the chief of police, who was a Catholic, didn't speak up and support him, etc. But then again, one of the leading politicians who was pro-abortion, his funeral was held at St. Michael's Cathedral. Yeah, so it's like that. And so that's why when people of various faith communities get disappointed in the boards of their churches and all sorts, I mean, we've had all sorts of situations where the pastors have been removed by their boards because of their outspokenness on the abortion issue.
These were the non-Catholic pastors, and their congregation has a lot more authority over what they can or can't do.
That's correct. And today I would say that because the teaching on euthanasia and the occasional teaching on abortion are rarely given now in Catholic churches. That's why if you were to take the average Catholic congregation and question them on the issues, for instance, my brother-in-law is still in a business where teachers are encouraged to give each of their students a thing that looks like a channel changer. The teacher knows which one each child has, and she has a console on her desk, and she asks a series of questions. And so the kids punch in what they think is as a result of the lesson that they've just been taught. And then she knows which students didn't grasp what was being said. And so she gives individual attention to those students. It works really well. So I went to a very strong priest and I said to him, listen, I think we should do this in your parish. And I laid it all out for him, and he said, I'd never get permission to do that. And I said, why not? He said, they wouldn't want to hear the results of this.
The Chancery wouldn't want to hear the results of this.
And so that's the situation. And with so many of the pastors of Christian denominations, etc., they're afraid to speak up because there will be people in the congregation who have had abortions or have counseled abortions that they'll be out on their tail feathers and they'll no longer have a job.
Which frequently does happen.
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's very good. People who are retired and don't have any possibility of people coming after them, they are the ones that should be speaking up. Don't expect the teachers in the Catholic schools to speak up because their jobs are in jeopardy. You speak up. And what does it do? Well, back in the day, my house was staked out. 2 goons followed me in the car. Back in those days, there were no cell phones, but I had a phone in my car as a fundraiser.
And you're one of few who had one of those at that time. They were big, big phones.
They were. So I called the cops. And I said, these 2 guys, here's the license plate, and they're following me. So I got to a certain point, and I said, I'm going to be at Cassandra in Victoria Park, on Cassandra, in about 5 minutes. They say, which way are you facing? I said, I'm facing east. Okay, so they came behind the guys from the west, and they went up and talked to them. And then one cop stood with these people, and the other came to me and said, what's going on? I said, well, we're leafleting in a riding against this person that's primary, Bob Ray, who was a
NDP candidate.
NDP candidate. He joined the Liberals later on and became the Premier of Ontario. And so I said, we're leafleting against him because he's supporting abortion. And they said, Morgenthaler? I said, yeah. The cop said, oh, I hate the guy. I said, well, you don't hate him. Hate what he does, et cetera, et cetera. He said, these guys they got tire irons in the car. I said, oh, they came to bash us, I guess. And he said, yeah, I can't do anything. I said, unless you found them with their bloodied tire irons and me lying on the ground. They said, yeah, I'll warn them. So he said, if anything happens to any of you, they've been warned and we know who they are, and et cetera, et cetera. I found out later on I could get them for watching and besetting or some other things, but he didn't tell me at the time. So there were so many of us in the van that went and then leafleted in that particular riding. And then...
Well, that was a thing the Campaign Life Coalition did all the time. That was one of your responsibilities, to influence elections in ridings.
Absolutely. And when Bob Ray then became the leader of the Liberal Party, left the NDP, became the leader of the Liberal Party, and we picketed his house, he brought in a lawsuit against 18 pro-lifers and Jane and John Doe, which is everybody else. And so we had to fight a court case, and they let 2 groups intervene, 2 groups of abortuaries intervene in the case, etc. They were all paid by the government, and of course our lawyers were not paid. They did the work pro bono, thank God.
And they were top lawyers, too.
They're top lawyers, too. We had a meeting at the Bond Place Hotel and we invited about 20 lawyers, and they all came, and we served them lunch or dinner or something, and it came out of there. They had suggested which 2 of them should handle the case, and they did a wonderful job.
It was
Don't say any names there.
No, it was very difficult, though, wasn't it?
It was very difficult indeed. Yeah. And the media was very sneaky too. One justice had spoken out, and so a guy in the major newspaper called me and said, "Hey, do you know so and so?" I said, "Why do you ask?" And said, "Well, I just think that he's probably one of your supporters. I'm just checking." So I had them go and get the file. Now, in those days, we had a bunch of cards. Yeah. And they looked through the cards, and they found his card. And I said, "Take it out." And they said, "Okay, what are we going to do with it?" I said, "Put it over there." And so I get back on the phone. I said, "I just looked through the cards, and we don't have a card with that guy's name on it." And he said, "Oh, I just thought that perhaps," because they were going to go after this justice and see that he got removed from his job. So other personalities, Archbishop Adam Exner, Catholic Archbishop, just died recently. Archbishop Exner was our main man when it came to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I think it was, and he stood up strongly. I can still remember I tried to track him down in British Columbia, which I said is on the Pacific coast of Canada. I'm 5 hours away in Toronto by plane. Would take me a lot longer walking. But I called to his office, and the secretary said, well, actually, he's up on a reservation tonight, and it's about 4 hours north of Vancouver. And I said, well, I have to talk to him. And she said, well, here's the number. So I phoned the number, and he came on the phone. And I told him what the situation was, and he said, okay, I'll take care of it. I said, do you hear the joke about the brave who screwed a light bulb into an outhouse? And he said, no. I said, he's the first native to wire ahead for a reservation. Well, he starts to laugh, and then he said, you know where I am? I said, no, I can guess. He said, I'm surrounded by chiefs here. I'll tell them the joke. They will probably appreciate it. So just little things like that. I mean, ordinary. Ida Venner was a nurse.
Yes.
Put an ad in the yellow pages of the telephone directory. For those that you don't know, back in those days, they had telephone directories with the names of people and their phone numbers and whatnot. So if you wanted to phone somebody, you looked in the book and you found them. So in Ida's case, she put in the yellow pages, which is where all the businesses were, pregnant and distressed, call this number. So the people would call Ida Venner's number, and she'd talk to them and counsel them out of killing their child, or having an abortion to kill their child. And she was phenomenal in doing that.
And she offered them a lot of help.
She offered them a lot of help, and she's one of those grassroots people. Mother Teresa said to me on Parliament Hill back in 1988.
Oh, wait a minute. Explain how that all happened. How did you get to Mother Teresa? What happened there?
A group of evangelicals in the province of Quebec, evangelical pastors, said, we'd like to invite Mother Teresa to come and speak to us. How would we ever do that? And I said, when do you want to have it, and what's the score? So I got other people involved, and one of our people, Annette, called our friend Father Lawrence Abello, who was working in India in the seminary there, who was helping Mother Teresa with her speeches and whatnot.
And he was the spiritual director.
He was her spiritual director, and so I won't tell something else. I'll just keep that quiet. But anyway, Mother Teresa agreed to come. So Gilles Grandin, who I had mentioned earlier, who went to the United Nations for us, former Canadian ambassador, I put him in charge of taking care of Mother Teresa. And the pastors all appreciated it very much because they didn't know the protocol with her. And so she traveled with another sister and had a press conference in Montreal and Quebec City, I think, and she chided the media for not telling the truth about abortion and whatnot. And then she came to Ottawa for the big rally and whatnot, and so I was one of the people invited to speak there. And Mother Teresa turned to me. Well, she actually looked up. She said, "Mr. Hugh," and I said, "Yes, Mother." And I had to bend down to hear her. And she said, the beautiful thing about the pro-life movement is that it's ordinary people doing extraordinary things for God. Yeah. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things for God. And I thought, wow. And then she said to me again, "Mr. Hugh, I was able to rest in your office. Thank you for providing the opportunity to rest there. You didn't waste any money on creature comforts." And I said, "Oh."
She was saying she liked the humility of the office of Campaign Life.
Torn linoleum on the floor, and we had mixed furniture and drawers that didn't properly open, the usual stuff for a pro-life office. Anyway, then when she was, later on when she was in Senator Haidash's office, I said to her, will you be joining in the march today, the walk? And she said, oh no, I'm an old woman, you know. But, you know, the work that you're doing is the most important work on earth. I said, yeah, I believe you're right, Mother. And it's the ordinary people. And it's like everybody in small towns and big cities and standing up. I know one lawyer who refused to allow the United Way to come into his law office. And there's a huge law office, huge number of people involved. And they said, oh, could we just come and talk to the people that are on our side? And he said no. So they never got in. Yeah. So it's just ordinary people doing extraordinary things for God. It's just absolutely amazing.
Tell about what you had Mother Teresa do also regarding one of your people who...
Right. Well, Mother, I said to one of our strong supporters, Frank Mountain, and his wife Marg, and their families would go and picket at the hospital on Sundays. And one day, going there, the road had just been resurfaced, and there was a little bit of a drop-off onto the shoulder, and Frank went into the drop-off, and the vehicle rolled. Nobody was injured except Frank. And Frank was then in a wheelchair the rest of his life. And paraplegic. And Frank was in the hospital. And it was just at the time that Mother was coming to Canada. So I said to Jill Grandin, I want her to visit Frank Mountain in the hospital. So he got back to me and said, no, she doesn't visit in hospitals or nursing homes or anything, because that's all she'd be able to do. She wouldn't be able to do the rest of her work. So I explained to Jill what had happened to the mountains, and she relented, and she said, I'll do it. So she went in to visit with the Mountain family in the hospital. And of course, when she went to our office, this meager office of ours, everybody was flipping out. All the people that were renting other spaces, they said, Mother Teresa's here in the building. I said, oh, get away from me. There's no Mother Teresa here. There she was, visiting with everybody, giving everybody little medals and things like that. And then when this David Packer, when they harassed him as a police officer in Toronto, we contacted Mother, and she wrote him a 4-page letter of support. Yeah. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And I apologize to all the other Canadian leaders and special people who've done wonderful work over the years that I can't remember. Mary Ellen Douglas, our national organizer for Campaign Life Coalition, has done yeoman's service for so many years, 40 or 50 years, and her husband Alan, who supported her and was an expert on all kinds of different things and was teaching her as she went along. He just died in the last 12 months or so. Yeah. And just members of Parliament and senators that spoke up, and wonderful people.
Yeah, they were very faithful.
They were very faithful, and unfortunately with the edict from this purportedly Catholic Prime Minister, diverting all these millions of dollars to kill children in Africa, and then he purports to be a champion of the underprivileged, and the Africans are saying, keep that out of here. We don't need your colonialism and all this sort of stuff, you know. It's
what did Father Ted used to say about the word abortion in Africa?
He didn't. Father Ted Colleton was an Irish Holy Ghost father who spent his last 30 years in Canada, but he spent 30 years in Kenya, in Africa, and he never heard the word abortion. It wasn't that he slapped his hands over his ears when they were talking about it. He just didn't know the words for it. It wasn't there. The people, those grassroots people, were like family. Everybody was, they took care of one. Another friend of mine, Father Mike Doyle, was in Papua New Guinea, and it was approaching Christmas just after he arrived, and he said, we have to think of special things we can do for the impoverished. And they looked at one another and said, Father, we do that all year. We don't just do it at Christmas time, we do it all year. Amazing. We who are privileged think we know everything, yeah. And really we learn from Charlie Lunchpail and Mary Washerwoman.
Yeah. Yeah. When you first started out in an office downtown Toronto, I think you had 1 or 2 secretaries. How did you recruit people from then on to expand the work and do more? What did you? How did you go about that?
Well, first of all, there's a one-room office with a huge industrial walk-in safe.
I remember that.
And everybody was afraid of getting locked in because the owners of the building didn't have the combination to the safe. And they didn't want to pay to have somebody come in and dismantle it.
Yeah.
So I can tell you I was there on many occasions. Somebody would say, could you get me some of those envelopes in there, those for the 8 by 10 paper? And I'd say, no, I'm not going in there, because I was petrified of getting locked in that thing.
Well, the rent was cheap.
The rent was cheap. As a matter of fact, it was Laura MacArthur with Toronto Right to Life who had an office in the building that encouraged Campaign Life after its founding on October 7th, 1978, to come in there. So it was a one-room office and one volunteer secretary that came in 3 days a week. And then after we had sent out these requests for people's Christmas cards, the money came in. Pardon me. I can still remember some doctors from St. Michael's Hospital right across the street who would come in wearing their greens. And Art Dunn would come in and drop some money on the desk. And then I can remember filmmakers, Peter and Pat Gerritsen, who Bernie Nathanson wanted to work with for more of his films, and they couldn't afford to do it. But Peter would come in and leave a check from Gerritsen Productions, and then Pat would come in a couple of hours later and leave another check from her personal account. So it was, Bernie McGraw was a lawyer I knew, right kitty corner from our office, and he did all kinds of legal work for us. And I went over there one day because he wasn't returning my phone calls. And I said, Bernard, I haven't got an invoice from you. And he said, if I charged you people, I wouldn't get to heaven. And I said, oh, okay. That was the type of people that we were around. Angela Costigan, another one, a lawyer who worked with us for years, and all her work was pro bono. We never were able to pay her at all.
She was a top lawyer, too.
Top lawyer, top lawyer. And so there were just so many people, so many wonderful things. One time we thought we were going to have to close the office because we were impoverished. And we were at prayer time, and we pray every day at lunchtime, 10 to 12, every day, for the abortionists and the women who are depressed and seeking abortion, and our donors, and just everybody. And so we were in the midst of prayer, and this lady came up 47 stairs to get to our office, no elevator, and she presented us with a check. And so after prayer time, she left. She didn't hang around to talk to us, and she left us a check for $5,000, which did everything for us.
Yeah.
It was...
that was a lot of money then.
And I recruited people all over the place. Sabina McLuhan was a member of my church congregation. And in those days, after the 11 o'clock service, we would have coffee. So there might be 75 to 100 people there. So I sat down at a table with her. I hadn't met her before. She was chain smoking. Most of the people there were smoking at the time. And I said to her, so what do you do? And she says, well, I like to write. I said, have you got anything that you've written? We're starting a newspaper. So that was in March 1983, so it was just before that.
Why were you starting the newspaper?
We were starting the newspaper because we couldn't get the truth out. And the media wouldn't tell the truth about what was going on. So we said, okay, well, we better start doing it. Well, what do you know about running a newspaper? I said, nothing. And they said, okay, well, we trust you. So go ahead, we'll support you. So I said to Sabina, let's see what you were. So the next Sunday, I sat with her again. And I said, oh, didn't you bring your writing material? She said, I didn't think you'd remember. Oh. So she reached into her purse and took it out. And eventually she was not just a columnist, she became the editor of the newspaper. But I have to tell you one interesting thing. We were at a fundraiser in Brampton, Ontario, and we had the speeches and whatnot. Now we were sitting down to dinner, and Dr. Ray Holmes had organized this thing. And the chef came out of the kitchen, all dressed in white, and looked over, and then called me over and said, is that woman McLuhan? And I said, yeah, Sabina McLuhan. Does she write for the interim newspaper? I said, yeah, she does. She writes columns at the moment. Yeah, could I speak to her? I said, I'll go and talk to her. So the woman went into the kitchen and brought in one of the waitresses. And I said, Sabina, this woman wants to talk to you. And she's, oh, God, she's going to give me a hard time because of something I've written. So over she went. She started talking to the two of them. I looked over, and they're all crying. And I thought, oh, they're giving her the gears again. So I got up and went over, and she beckoned me away and says, all right. So when she came back and sat down through tears, she said, the mother read my column in the interim newspaper. She was so moved by it, she put it in front of her daughter's plate before breakfast. And her daughter came down, and she said, I want you to read that. And the girl read it and broke into tears, and she said, Mom, I'm pregnant. I was going for an abortion. And so as a result of that column that she wrote, the girl didn't have the abortion, now had a little 3-year-old boy. So it was all happy. And then the woman said to me, McLuhan, that's an unusual name. I said, her father-in-law is Marshall McLuhan, the media guru. Ah, is he pro-life? I said, yes, he's pro-life.
You better explain who he is, because most people don't know right now who he was.
Marshall McLuhan wrote books, appeared in a what's his name, movie anyway. He said, well, of course, as he's walking along the street, he said, of course, something that Marshall McLuhan said, what is it, Marshall? And Marshall was just a pedestrian standing there, and he said what it was. The medium is the message. The global village, that's what we live in, and on about all kinds of wonderful things. And so she said, oh my heavens. So she is following really in her father-in-law's footsteps. And I said, well, she's walking in her own shoes, so that's the way it is. Yeah. But that's how we recruited people. We recruited all kinds of people just like that, but you had to ask them. Nowadays, people are saying, well, we need lectors in our parish, in our church, or whatever. I said, what did you do? Well, I put a little notice in the church bulletin. I said, that's not going to work. What you have to do is say, excuse me, you'd be a great lector here. Oh, I'm not sure I can. Then you train them, and there you got your whole team of lectors. Yeah. That's what you have to do. And this person over here, you think they'd be good in politics, and they're solidly pro-life? Encourage them. Get a group of people around them. Help them to win nominations. Help them to get elected. And once they're elected, don't abandon them to people that have been in the party for years who are pro-abortion and whatnot. Yeah. You got to hang with them so that they remain strong in everything.
Who are some of the people that you actually convinced to get involved in politics and they succeeded?
Well, all sorts of people had decided that, well, the one person in Mississauga that became a Liberal member of Parliament when Tom Wappel and I were speaking, and he came over and said he was thinking of getting involved. What party? Or Liberals? Well, you talk to Tom. And I was in Newfoundland and in PEI, and the guy wearing the hockey jacket came up and said, I'm interested, and he got elected. And they got elected not by hiding their pro-lifeness, but by standing behind it and not being afraid to say, oh yeah, I'm opposed to killing preborn children. I'm more interested in helping women who are distressed and pregnant and whatnot with solid solutions, not, oh, I'll pray for you. Yeah, you pray for them, of course, but you then find out what their problems are and you solve the problems. How do you do that? You go to the local church that might be on site. You call a pro-life organization and tell them what's going on. John Cardinal O'Connor said, bring the children to me. I'll take care of them. You're distressed and pregnant, you're unwanted pregnancy, we'll take care of them. And so that's what you have to do.
What are the organizations that came out of Campaign Life Coalition?
Well, the interim newspaper in 1983, Tories for Life, which is the conservative pro-life members of Parliament and senators, Liberals for Life, which were the liberal pro-life members of Parliament and senators. Did I mention the interim newspaper? Well, we brought Life Chain to Canada. I talked to Royce in California, And I liked the idea, and so I put this Lou DeRocco, who's now Father Louis DeRocco, I put him in charge, and he organized it across Canada. 40 Days for Life. When that proposal came forward, we had one person in our Toronto office that was prepared to handle that, and she organized it, and then we organized it across the country, and now they're organized.
Yeah.
All these different groups are organizing it themselves.
Real Women?
Real Women started in our office, and they've done a fantastic job over the years too. Life Site News.
Family Coalition Party?
Family Coalition Party. Just so many.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, my job, I saw it as a connector. Somebody came with a project or whatever, and they needed help, they needed support, and I connected to them to the support. And that's how it all came together. It wasn't me, it was just everybody together.
Yeah.
That's why when they wanted me to go on a nationwide speaking tour, they wanted to make Jim Hughes a household name. I said, absolutely not. This isn't about me.
Yeah.
It's about the issue. And if there's any success at all, you look to God, because that's where the success. And the failures, you can look at them and say, well, he's the wrong person to be in that job, but I'm here because I feel like I was called to do it, and I'm so blessed to have said yes each time.
Okay, this may be a loaded question. What are some of the absolute most memorable and encouraging developments that happened during your years in the pro-life movement?
The most important thing was it deepened my faith in God. The second thing is meeting the people. I mean, everywhere I went, the most unbelievable, sacrificial people. They just inspired me. And then all the ones that popped up in the middle of it, when Joe Borowski in LaSalle, Manitoba, in the middle of winter said, do you want to have a sauna? And I said, sure. So we went down the hill. It wasn't in the house, it was down the hill. And we came out of there, and he says, now we have to shower off. And I thought, great. So we walked farther down the hill. I said, he's got a shower downhill? I don't know what the heck the temperature was, but it was really cold. And I walked into the middle of the Saskatchewan River, I think it was, and under I went, and he said, oh, Jamesy, that's really good. Most people are afraid of getting their head under. And I thought, the next morning I looked out and I see this muddy river, and oh my God. People just, so many individual, pardon me, that I can't remember. The Jewish guys that came to me with a song. And they said, we wrote this about the end of life and whatnot, and we thought you in the pro-life movement might use it. And I said, oh, what's it called? Dear Brother. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. So the whole thing was two brothers in the womb. And they were afraid. One of them was leaving now. There was lights and everything. And, oh, dear brother, I'm all alone. You're gone from me forever. No, what you hear are shouts of joy. Congratulations, it's a boy. Soon you're going to be with me again. That sort of thing. We had conferences all over the country, and they were well attended. We had guest speakers from all over the place. I would invite leading American politicians to the Parliamentary Pro-Life Caucus in Ottawa, where we would have lunches. We went from the dinners to the lunches, and then we had these dinners, the lunches on Parliament Hill, so that the MPs could get in and out for when they were on duty and whatnot.
So who were some of those names?
Bernard Nathanson, Congressman Chris Smith, and Anna Halpine, Jack Wilkie, Joe Scheidler, Frank Pavone. I don't know.
There was a long list.
A whole list of them.
Yeah.
And then we subsequently invited them to come to the National March in Ottawa, and we had many of those same leaders speak here. And then we had members of the International Right to Life Coalition come to we would have an International Right to Life conference in Ottawa, for instance, and invite everybody to come to the march and then the banquet afterwards, and we had them speak at the banquet. And marvelous individuals.
Did you have the Alaska governor there? I can't remember that.
See, I said we have to have what was her name?
Yeah, I can't.
Anyway, I said we have to have her speak, and they all said, "Oh, I don't know who is this again." I said it's the governor of Alaska. She's really pro-life and whatnot and whatnot. Let's take whatever. The next year, they said, "Who should we get?" Well, we should get the Alaska. I said it's too late. She's now running as a vice president candidate or something like that. And it was pretty funny when that sort of things happen.
Yeah. Let me see. What have been some of the greatest disappointments that you have experienced?
Well, when I first got involved, I thought I could be a key person in stopping the killing. Why? Well, because I was a salesman, and because people listened to me. And I thought for sure that would happen. But I also thought that the clergy in all those different denominations would be so supportive and whatnot, and they would be inspiring their congregations in their sermons and homilies. And when that didn't happen, I thought, holy crow. And people would say, well, my pastor doesn't think this is important, and my pastor says you only got into this because of the money. And I said, oh my God. And then on with all of the different things that were lied to them or whatever. And that was very difficult. It was very difficult to watch pro-life politicians or candidates that you supported to get into politics that won, and all of a sudden they were no longer pro-life, that they had flipped for the soup. Yeah. And that was hard to take. With individuals with whom I worked, a wonderful group of people. I had very few disappointments when I was the boss for 40 years. I didn't have any, I can't think of any real disappointments I had from the people that I worked with. There was dissension in the pro-life movement in Canada, as there's dissension in the United States and abroad. It's everywhere, and you just work through it. Yeah. As one founder of Campaign Life, Paul Formby, who's now a lawyer in British Columbia, he's had an expression, ignore the buzz in the background. And so we took that on, ignore the buzz in the background. And Mother Teresa, again, when she said, if you want to change the world, change your heart so you're doing what God wants you to do, and then deal with what's at your feet. And a CBC interviewer, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation interviewer on TV, said, Mother Teresa, it's fine for all that, but you haven't made a difference in the poverty here in India and whatnot. And Mother Teresa just spread her cloak a little bit, and she said, well, it made a difference for these two. And there was a little boy and a little girl. And if you ever see Alistair Sim in that Christmas movie, A Christmas Carol, you'll remember that a king or maybe a religious figure opened his cloak, and there were two children there. That's what that reminded me of. So that's what made a difference for those two.
This is a little different. What were some of the most difficult things that you had to endure during all those years?
Well, at times when we didn't have any funds, I went to a wealthy supporter of ours, a businessman, and he loaned us $100,000 interest-free. That was very difficult to go and ask for that, and being impoverished so much of the time was very difficult. The disappointments, I can remember when the TV cameras and the media. The scribes were in my office when they announced the decision on the Charter of Rights and whatnot. And that was a tough blow because it wasn't expected to be that bad. Mostly it was ordinary people, an evangelical girl saying, why don't you call on God more often? You've got all these Catholics that are going over to daily Mass at St. Michael's Cathedral. Do you go with them? And I thought, no. And it was an Ash Wednesday with one of the young women there that said, we're going over for ashes. Are you coming? And I thought, well, I guess so. I always go on Ash Wednesday. So I went over there, and I went the next day, and the next day, and the next day to today. Mm-hmm. So that, Barbara impressed me with that. What if I was supposedly a Catholic, I better behave like one.
And she was an evangelical,
She was an evangelical, yeah.
Yeah. Strategies that you and Campaign Life Coalition developed, what proved to be the most helpful?
A monthly CLC news with tidbits of information in there so that people would become more aware of everything else. And that led to the interim newspaper, which led to LifeSite News. And all of those little things leading one to the other were so important.
Going through all the history of how things developed over time, what were the most unexpected things that happened that you could never have anticipated, both positive and negative?
I got a call one day from the Prime Minister's office, and a woman said, I'm calling for Prime Minister, I don't remember now which Prime Minister it was. Who was the last Conservative Prime Minister? Stephen Harper. And Mr. Harper would like to invite you to the canonization of Brother Andre. And I said, oh yeah, sure, thank you very much, and I hung up. And then about 2 days later, I got another call from the same woman, and she said, I'm calling from the Prime Minister's office. He would like to invite you to come as part of the Canadian delegation to Rome for the canonization of Brother Andre. And I said, now, for those people that aren't Catholic, it's not like they take this stiff a person's body after he's died and shove it in a cannon and blow up the person out the other end. It's when the people are elevated to sainthood in the Catholic Church. So Harper, who wasn't a Catholic, invited two of us, one representative, Cecilia Forsyth from Real Women, and Jim Hughes from Campaign Life Coalition, to go to the canonization as official members of the Canadian delegation. So now that was a surprise. And the strange thing was, in St. Peter's Basilica, which is a huge place that holds God knows how many hundreds and maybe 1,000 people or so, we were in there when there was nobody else there. And we were to go through the main doors out into the square, and we'd be up on the stage, and she said that the Canadian ambassador said to us, now you're going to have 50,000 pair of eyes on you when you go out those doors. So make sure that you're prepared. Also, as I warned you, it's 3 hours between bathroom breaks. And of course, that was probably the scariest thing I've heard. And so out the doors opened, and there were all these people. You say, oh my. And so then, as I walked to my place, I passed the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, who was there. Must have expressed shock that I was there. Carl Anderson, and somebody else, I can't remember who. Anyway, that was a very interesting thing. Part of our trips with the International Right to Life Federation, giving presentations in Honduras and the Philippines. In the Philippines, we were on the front page of the paper that we were coming. When we were in Poland, and we went to Auschwitz, and went into the concentration camp, that was eerie. And then we saw the cell of that great Canadian saint with fresh flowers in it. And we were told every day Maximilian Kolbe's cell has fresh flowers in it. And I thought, wow. And so I had to go outside and sit down on a bench just to think about what went on here. And Jack Wilkie, our president, stood in the sand where they encouraged them, stand in that sand. That's where they executed the soldiers, the people that lived in the concentration camp when one of them tried to escape. They'd bring 10 in and make them stand in the sand, and they'd butcher them there. And then they'd have to, when they got towards the end of the 10, they would have to use shovels and take the sand out because it was drenched in blood, and then put fresh sand in there, and then put the shovel aside and stand in the sand and be executed. And so that was, and then I think being with a man who was one of our drivers, and they translated from Polish that his mother had been abducted on the streets by the Nazis and taken to not Auschwitz, but across the street. And her father went and collected as much money and gems and whatnot as he could, and he went to that camp and paid a bribe, and his daughter was released, and she got on the back of his motorcycle and escaped. And he had an official document that said that he was in his mother's womb when she was in that concentration camp. And then sitting with the priest of the local parish, where they had a home for special needs children. And they got warned that the Nazis were coming to take them away to a safer place where they would. And so immediately the word went out, and the parents and all the people in the parish came, and they took the children, and by the time the trucks came with the Nazis in them, there were no children there. Oh, isn't that strange? And then when they were banned from having a cross erected outside, I think it was not the Nazis, no, I think it was the Soviets, the cross was going to be torn down. So the parishioners got together and took the cross down and took it and hid it in a grain silo on the church property. And then the big procession that took place after the Soviets were out, and they proceeded back and put the cross back where it was. Fascinating stuff, and listening to people through translators, people in the Senate and whatnot who spent time in jail, and being in the Polish Parliament, and there's a chapel, a Roman Catholic chapel in the Parliament, and they sitting down with the head of the Senate who chastised us for not being stronger in our pro-life efforts and whatnot. Oh, interesting. Being in Honduras and going to the former ambassador's home for dinner, and there's a guy outside with a gun guarding his house, and across the street there's another guard guarding his father's house. Oh, really interesting. Being in Rome for the canonization of Brother Andre, and going to the papal resident, Canadian residence in the Vatican, and being there with all sorts of people that I'd read about who were all there. I don't know, there's so many things that just, you can't dwell on things too much.
Overwhelming.
Oh, it's overwhelming, and so many people say, well, you can't watch that pro-life film because you've seen them all. I said, I can't watch that pro-life film because I choke up every time I see them. What? After all this time? Yep. After all the killing of just one child. Yeah. it's hard to take. It's hard to take when everybody's turning a blind eye to it. Oh, you're the pro-life guy. No, you go to my church. You're the pro-life guy too, not just me. We're all called to do this, to defend the weak and whatnot. Yeah, well, I'm a pacifist. I said, that's fine. They want to come and shoot you, that's fine. You don't have to defend yourself. But if you don't defend this old lady over here who's 95, you aren't even a man. You know, it's interesting. That's why it's good to thank God every day for allowing you to do the work, because it's, and you have to remember that everybody is equal. We're all created in the same image and likeness of God, no matter who we are. Abortionists, killers of all types, we've all been created. And so we have to pray for one another very strongly, very important, and pray to God that we stay the course and not quit.
I've seen many people repent and change who it didn't seem it would have been possible otherwise.
I've seen many people change for the good. One secretary in our office, she said, I was pro-choice, but then I educated myself. And then when she did, she couldn't turn back to where she was before. But it distresses me to see a lot of people who claim to be pro-life who said, I can't keep doing the fight. And I understand there's all kinds of problems at home and whatnot. A woman and her son who were very strong. Her husband and the boy's father was a police officer, and he was on them all the time. So she had to stop getting her pro-life publications, etc. She read them at her friend's house. And she just kept praying that her husband would see the need to do what was right. And I was in Florida one time, and I was walking up the Gulf of Mexico, and I see a flag, a Canadian flag on one of the resorts. I see an American flag up on top and a Canadian flag underneath it. So as I'm walking, there's a man looking out at me. And so the next time I went up, I looked, and there he was again, only this time he's approaching me. And he said, are you Jim Hughes? And I said, yeah. He said, I'm Staff Sergeant so-and-so. I'm the one that called you to tell you that David Packer was refusing to guard the illegal Morgentaler abortuary. I thought, oh my heavens, a small world. And then I've been there too, and enjoying myself on the beach, only to have an abortionist and her husband come down the beach and take a second look and whatnot. And she points at me, and what's that? Blah, blah, blah. I thought, oh, okay. And just as you're out there with Life Chain and holding a sign, and somebody starts yelling at you, and you get a chance while you're there for the hour to remember, can you not watch 1 hour with me?
Yeah.
And it helps a lot.
Yeah. Life Chain is pretty powerful.
It is. Dan DeRocco, one of our key leaders, he said that he calculated 1 year that about 1 million people in Canada see Life Chain. Yeah. 1 million people across the country see Life Chain. And that's really important that they do, because it's, and one homily or sermon, although in a case that I'm quite familiar with, a woman said to the priest, I'm not coming back to the church if I have to be opposed to contraception and abortion. And he tried to talk to her, but she would have nothing to do with him. Hadn't been to church in 40 years or something, and wanted to come back. But she said, if I have to be against that, I'm not coming back. So, you know, very interesting. And then he said to me, what should I have said? I said, you did what you were supposed to do. And you're still there for her if she changes her mind.
Well, we never know what will happen once they've heard or seen the message. And you've learned many times that years later, you find out someone saw Life Chain and their child is now living. Only we didn't know that.
Yep.
You know, it happens all the time.
Well, we tried to publicize the fact that here were all these babies that had been saved. And like 4 or 5 years earlier, could we take a picture of you with your child? No. Yeah. Why? I wouldn't want my child to know that I had actually contemplating
Yeah.
killing them before birth.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, understand.
Yeah, and then other things like, I was never going to have an abortion. Oh, is that right? Well, didn't you spend about 6 hours in the office arguing with somebody about the life in your womb? Well, yes, I did, but you were contemplating it.
Yeah.
And thank God the people were there, unlike when I was there. And the man said, why weren't you here last week when my girlfriend went in there?
Yeah.
And then others had said, well, how come you're not on the line all the time? Well, I'm trying to organize all this stuff politically and whatnot, and I'm in an office and people are out there that I've sent over there because they wanted to do this.
Well, you were in Operation Rescue.
I was in Operation Rescue. Was really interesting because I was going to join everybody. I was there at the briefing beforehand, and they said, you can't go there. You can't be arrested. I said, why not? And said, we need you coordinating everything. I said, okay. Well, so as people got off the bus outside the abortuary, I was there shaking hands with them, thanking them for coming and whatnot. Then I went back to the office and listened to all the, my mother and father both got arrested. They said you'd take care of us. I said, oh, wait a minute. And how old are you? Well, my brother's 17. I said, okay, you can take care of yourself and whatnot. But that was very interesting. And Rita Holmes called me one time and she said, how come you didn't visit my husband in the jail? I said, you've got lots of support with your family and friends. It's other people over here that I'm trying to hold up that they're having difficulty with it. And it was interesting.
So you were in front of an abortuary, Morgenthalers.
Well, they threw me down the stairs. The police did.
Yeah. And sleeves were ripped off your coat, right?
Yeah. And two women that were there on our side saw me maybe a year later, and they said, we didn't go back because you faked getting your sleeves ripped out of your ski jacket.
Oh, gosh.
I said, what? And they said, we knew you had you probably loosened the threads on the sleeves. I said, I can't even sew on a button, let alone loosening the threads. But the funny part was the two guys that they arrested, Paul Dodds, our lawyer, and Mel Middleton, a pastor, they grabbed them. They weighed about 120 pounds, I'd say, and I was about 230 or something like that. So they threw me down the stairs first. I landed on my face down there. And then as they picked up Paul and Mel, they bounced the two of them off my back. So it was an interesting time.
I saw it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've been involved in pro-life many hours every day.
Yeah. I figured at one point I was working about 100 hours a week. And now that I'm no longer the president, I only work about 60.
It's a life of
But
priority.
you know what I did, though? In the beginning, I always took my calendar and talked to my wife and said, okay, what family things do we have here?
Yeah.
And the family things always came before anything else.
Yeah.
And so my oldest granddaughter, who's now, 22 maybe, at Christmas time, she was in the Montessori school. And at Christmas time, we were at their home. And she gave this gift to me and passed over her grandma, who was working as a nurse at St. Michael's Hospital, and gave one to her other grandmother. And she said, dear, why are you giving those presents only to those people? And said, well, they were at my Christmas party. So I was there. So I remind my wife frequently, well, I was there for all those events, concerts, graduations, whatnot, because the family always came before anything else. And she said to me, Father Colleton was just here. He's going to get arrested. If you go out of this house wanting to get arrested, that's the end of your pro-life work. I'll support you as long as, if they come and arrest you, that's fine. But you're not to go attempting to get arrested. That's not the goal.
Yeah.
The goal is to save the lives of the children.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So all those years and all that you've done, how has this affected your personal life? You've said some of it so far, but in general.
I rely on God a lot, and probably I was taking them for granted in the beginning. And then I began to realize that my prayers were important in what I was doing. And then the empathy I have for people that find themselves in those situations, and I didn't have that empathy before. And remembering that every single human being was created by God the same way I was. And that has affected me a lot. And then when things started going wrong, I remember reading in the paper that people going to work were so depressed. So about April, I began sitting on my veranda, which was on a bus route. The bus passes by not far from the veranda of my house. So as the bus came up the street, I waved. And then the next bus came up about 15 minutes later, and I waved again. So I did this every day, reading the morning paper and having a cup of tea before I went downtown to work. And so Ginny was working afternoon shift, and she came down with her house coat on, had her tea, sitting on the veranda. And the bus came up, and I waved, and a whole pile of people waved back. And she said, "Oh, who's that?" I said, "Oh, just some friends of mine." "Oh, okay." So she got a section of the paper, and she was reading that, and the next bus came up, and I waved, and almost everybody waved back. And she said, Who are those people?" I said, "I don't know, just people I wave to every morning." "You wave to the bus every morning to people you don't know?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I'm getting out of here." So she went back into the house. And then the tree in the front of our house would start to bloom and the leaves would come out, so I had to stop because nobody could see that. I learned then that there's a bus stop at my corner and people standing there all the time, nobody talking. And as I go by, I said, "Morning, everyone." And a few of them at the beginning said, "Oh, hi, what? And now when I go by, almost everybody says, "Good morning."
Yeah.
I make sure that I am cautious. "What about that woman over there?" "Yeah, her sister just died and she's alone." "Oh." So I was at church and I had to take up the collection, and the collection basket on the end and a long handle. So when I got to her, I hit her on the top of the head with the collection basket. And people around her gasped, but she laughed. And now, even to this day, she'll say to me, when I was having my bleak periods,
Yeah.
there you were, hitting me on the head. I was in Florida at some sort of a craft fair, and there was a woman there who made angels. She crocheted angels for all sorts of different things, for hope, for faith, for love, for whatever. So I got one of those and I mailed it to the seniors, to the place, the seniors place, the hospital where her sister was, and she put it on the cork board behind the head of her bed. And she said, those little things that you did made a big difference to me.
Yeah.
And to my sister. And I said, "Oh, they're just little." She said, "No." And so it's little things like that I didn't do before. Thank yous, always thank you. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to this one and that one.